So let me bring in our political editor, Andrew Clennell. And Andrew, a bit of news out of yesterday's forum hosted by Sky News, the Economic Outlook.
Yes, let's go back to this Sky News forum held in Sydney yesterday involving the Treasurer Jim Chalmers with what I thought were some notable comments early in the life of this government. I asked the Treasurer if a recession could be avoided. Why? Well, have a look at the last devastating recession in Australia in the 1990s, not the most recent recession caused by COVID lockdowns. This is when Paul Keating infamously said this is the recession Australia had to have. There had been a boom built on rising asset prices, financed by increased borrowing, and that had to end. So here is the fear, essentially, that so many have borrowed at these low interest rates when interest rates rise, and as the economy overheats due to inflation, businesses and punters go bust and the economy goes south. Treasurer Jim Chalmers does not think so. He says here that inflation is his concern, not a recession, and he would be getting top-level advice on this.
That's not on my list of fears for our domestic economy. You know, as I said at the end of my contribution before, you know, I genuinely believe that we have, certainly in the medium term, more opportunities than challenges, but the challenges that we have right now are incredibly serious and incredibly significant. That's how I see it.
Now, we know we're getting an employment/wages summit in September and then a white paper. I put it to the Treasurer here that perhaps there were dangers of a similar outcome to the Henry tax review under the Rudd government, a report that comes too late to do meaningful reform, too late in the term, that is. He said he had learnt the lessons of that.
Wayne Swan is a guy you worked for in government. Government took forever to come to a Henry tax review. You've only got 3 years. You're talking about a job summit, I believe it'll be in September, then a white paper. Don't you need to get the foot going on reform early rather than late in the term?
Well, we've already got in the pipeline a whole range of proposals which go to some of the issues that Dan and Jennifer are talking about. You know, we've got a plan for hundreds of thousands of fee-free TAFE places in areas where there are skills shortages. We've got a new arrangement for determining and agreeing where those skills shortages are, which is more responsive to developments in the economy in Skills Australia. We've got plans around childcare reform. We've got plans around the NBN. We've got plans around co-investment in advanced manufacturing. Probably our most significant policy that we already have in train is our Powering Australia plan, which is particularly relevant and of interest right now. And so we have a reform agenda already underway.
Another review the government has announced is the review of the Reserve Bank. Interesting in light of the many rate rises we're expecting this year.
If you talk about that white paper and you talk about the Reserve Bank review, can you give us at least a clue as to what sort of outcomes you might be looking for from those particular reviews?
Well, obviously we don't want to preempt the outcomes of those conversations because we want them to be meaningful. But in the context of the Reserve Bank review, you know, we've said publicly already, you know, it's been some time before we've properly considered the interaction of monetary policy and fiscal policy, some decades since we've done that. I've spoken to the Governor of the Reserve Bank many times before the election and after the election about doing that in a collaborative way, which isn't some kind of opportunity just for people to take shots at the RBA, but to genuinely reconsider the targets that they work under, the constraints that they work under, the way that we construct that decision making.
A pretty clear answer here from the Treasurer on whether he will ever look at tax reform. He says he can't because of the budget situation.
Commentators and business leaders have been talking for a long time about lower income tax, lower company tax and increased GST. Do you, coming into the Treasurer's job, just say that sort of reform's just too hard? It's just too difficult politically to do meaningful tax reform like that in this country?
Well, we won't be going down those paths that you just nominated, not because of the political difficulty, but partly because of the fiscal constraints and also because I think that the best place to start on tax reform is multinational tax because there's this big global movement toward, led by the OECD and others and out of the US about taxing multinationals more effectively, more fairly, so they're paying more tax in the countries where they make their profits. We've had a heap of conversation with the business community in opposition and now ideally in government about some meaningful but relatively modest steps that we can take down that path.